is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Afghanistan descends into chaos and a refugee crisis. Thousands of civilians make for the relative safety of Kabul as the Taliban take more territory.
Turkey bolsters its border security as Europe braces for a fresh refugee crisis.
Tesla's chief executive says Europe's long-delayed gigafactory in Germany will open before the end of the year.
And fairy tale financial results for Disney, but one leading lady's lawsuit against them may not have a happy ending. Taliban fighters have tightened their grip on Afghanistan with rapid advances across the country. 14 provincial cities now under their control. In the last 24 hours, Afghanistan's second and third largest cities, Kandahar and Herat, have fallen, along with the key regional centre of Lashkargah. Those gains mean that half of the population of 38 million people are now living in areas controlled by Taliban fighters who are edging closer to the capital, Kabul.
Meanwhile, Ukraine has become the latest country to announce plans to evacuate its citizens from Afghanistan. The United States and United Kingdom have already said they're sending troops to help their embassy staff and civilian workers leave the country. Andrew Wilson reports.
Amateur footage confirms a major event. Kandahar has changed hands. Afghanistan's second city and former headquarters to a Western military campaign that after 20 years appears to have achieved almost nothing. The sudden departure of American and British troops has created a vacuum that is being filled with extraordinary speed. In the Gulf city of Doha, so-called peace talks between the Taliban, international powers and the official Afghan government have broken up. Final calls for an accelerated peace process seem a world away from the brutal reality on the ground. And the international frustration is clear.
We are continuing to engage with the Taliban in Doha. I mean, we are continuing to believe that there is a political solution that can be had. This doesn't mean that we are also blind to what is going on on the ground.
The warlords are taking over with bewildering efficiency, and a national army that took 20 years and billions of dollars to train is melting ahead of its advance. Thousands have already taken flight, and Afghanistan's neighbors are bracing themselves for a flood of refugees. On the Pakistan border, there have already been clashes as the numbers threaten to swamp the checkpoints. Now the Americans and the British are sending troops back to help get their civilians out as quickly as possible, leaving the politicians to defend an increasingly confused operation.
This is not abandonment. This is not an evacuation. This is not the wholesale withdrawal. What this is a reduction in the size of our civilian footprint.
I have concern that when states become failed states or warlike states, as it's looking like at the moment in Afghanistan, the breeding ground for both poverty, and we shouldn't forget that, both poverty and indeed terrorism grows.
And that is the reality facing all parties concerned about this troubled region. The Taliban advances largely unopposed. The Western soldiers that contained it are gone. And any long-standing alliances between the local warlords and the even more extremist Al-Qaeda group remain intact. The refuge for international terror, established in the 90s, looks well on the way to being re-established once again. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
The United Nations World Food Programme says the situation has the hallmarks of a humanitarian crisis and is concerned about a looming tide of hunger. But is Europe willing to accept possibly hundreds of thousands of new Afghan migrants? Well, let's talk now to Adam Combs, who is from the Norwegian Refugee Council. Thanks so much indeed for being with us on the programme, Adam. So, according to your teams in Afghanistan, what's the situation like now on the ground? What are people facing there?
Yes, thank you. The situation is critical, and it's also incredibly dynamic. It's been changing. The pace of change has been challenging. In terms of numbers, this year we've seen 390,000 people displaced over the already 3.5 million that were there before, and especially in the last 3 months, that we've never seen higher numbers. We see difficulties of refugees crossing borders, both due to expenses and the conflict itself. And so the major amount of displacement that we're seeing is internal displacement. And we're finding that Kabul is becoming the epicenter of this displacement crisis. Temperatures today far over 30 degrees, tens of thousands of people living in the rough in city parks. The systems are very, very much overloaded as we're working on now. So the situation is dire. It is a humanitarian crisis.
So how many people roughly are we talking about, and where can they go?
Yeah, as I said, we're talking over 390,000 people have been displaced this year. And they are choosing to go to urban centers. They are going to Kabul, largely. We are seeing some movement towards neighboring countries, Iran and Pakistan specifically. However, it has been difficult, and we really urge the neighboring countries to continue the committable presence that they've had before in accepting Afghans, and make sure that the rights of the parties are secured to be able to make that move in their attempt to find safety.
So some will presumably, as you say, go to neighbouring countries, but what about further afield? Do you think these refugees will be welcomed in other countries now that many have stopped sending migrants back?
Yeah, I think that's difficult to say from our point of view. For me, as a humanitarian agency working in Afghanistan, our focus is on the region and on the countries that are neighboring Afghanistan.
And Afghanistan, of course, was already suffering from a major drought. So what's the impact of the fighting being on your operations there?
It is making things difficult. I think we are committed to stay and deliver. We are in the process now of retooling and revamping our approach to the activities and making it more of an emergency response related. Our staff are epic. We have 1,600 national staff working in Afghanistan that are equally affected by this conflict as Afghans, and they are working hard to make the changes needed, both in terms of emergency assistance and working with the internally displaced.
When it comes to those people who are being displaced, a large number of them are women and children.
Exactly. And those are possibly the most vulnerable in that. NRC has worked a lot with education, and we're seeing especially the education facilities are becoming, have suffered damage and have suffered targeting. And so it is important that we maintain and ask all parties in the conflict to respect that and push forward with education needs for children.
So we have UN agencies saying that this has the hallmarks of a humanitarian catastrophe, a humanitarian crisis. Is that a fair assessment, do you think?
I agree completely. The level and scope of this in Afghanistan is huge. We have had over the years incidences of provincial capitals being taken over, but now we're facing a nationwide scope that is incredibly challenging. However possible. And I think we need to remain the optimism of our abilities to operate and provide needed assistance to the vulnerable populations of Afghanistan.
So what can the international community do now to try and limit the extent of this crisis?
I think the important point from our point of view is to maintain the focus on humanitarian assistance, maintain the call and the advocacy to ensure access of humanitarian actors on the ground to all areas of the country, and to continue the presence and continue the focus of Afghanistan in the international arena.
Okay, Adam Coombs, thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme today.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Zamaralai Abbasin in Kabul. How significant is the fall of Herat and Kandahar? Has the tide turned against the Afghan army?
Hello, Jamie. This was a big achievement for the Taliban on the offensive side and their conflicts and the besiege that they have been making all around the country. Of course, two biggest cities of Afghanistan, Kandahar and Herat, was a big achievement for the Taliban, and it has been following in different eras politically and militarily. But at the same time, there are still conflicts in some parts of the country. For example, in northern Badakhshan province, Wursaj district just fell to the Taliban. In Paktika and some other provinces in southeast and west of the country. But eastern part of the country seems much calm than other provinces in Afghanistan. When we come to the conflict that has been continuing all around the country, the Taliban are seeking somehow different approach. For example, we saw a very dramatic approach of Taliban towards Ismail Khan, the prominent jihadi leader, Herat, the provincial governor, the chief of police, chief of NDS in Herat province, and they held a meeting out there which was made public and reached the media towards Taliban through the Taliban media operations. That's something dramatic for most of the people. Ismail Khan, who has been against Taliban, an extreme approach, is now talking in a very smooth way with the Taliban. Same goes, and Logar just fell this afternoon to the Taliban. The government is still with the Taliban, and they have issued pictures together. So it looks much smiling, and the Taliban approach and policies is now showing off that they will have no problem with those who surrender to them, but they will start fighting to those who are just fighting with them. And that's the current scenario, and it is changing every hour.
Do people think that the Taliban will take Kabul, and if so, when?
Yes, of course, there are concerns in the residents of Kabul. Everybody is talking about this. Most of the people who have the opportunities and all the capabilities, they are trying to flee the country, particularly capital Kabul, and everybody is thinking about what to pack, where to go, and finally how to leave. That's something like a phobia or a very close reality, because two very close capital cities like Ghazni and Logar, they are filled to the Taliban, and that's how concerns are emerged all around the capital, and people are afraid of this. But at the same time, Jimmy, we are witnessing something politically. This evening, we got reports from the presidential palace that President Ghani held a very high-profile security meeting, and they announced they will go in a fight with the Taliban. At the same time, High Peace Council Chief Dr. Abdullah is in Kabul, and he has just reached Kabul, and he is supposed to be meeting tonight with President Ashraf Ghani, and he had got some recipes or things from Doha that he will talk about. But according to the things, there is a very long-term discussion about the transitional government. Even the surrender of the president is one of the options that are being discussed in Afghan medias now. But president's approach and his message and response is very clear. They will go to the war, and at the same time, the first vice president of the country has said that he will never surrender to the Taliban and any circumstances. But it seems that the message is clear. The government goes to the war, Taliban are ready, they are getting progress, and that's what make more discussion in the country. But let's wait tonight for Dr. Abdullah and Dr. Ghani's meeting, that what will come at the end.
Zamirullah Abasin in Kabul, thank you very much.
Beijing's new ambassador to Washington has met officials at the State Department at a time he says relations between the two countries are at a crossroads. CGTN's Owen Fairclough has been watching developments.
Both China and the US issued their statements swiftly after new Chinese ambassador to the United States, Qin Gang, visited the US State Department to be hosted by Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. And the contrast between these two statements is perhaps just perhaps very telling. The Chinese embassy to the United States thanking US colleagues for the support that they'd shown Qin since his arrival here in the United States at the end of last month, then saying that relations between the US and China are at a new crossroads, a statement loaded with ambiguity for many, given that both sides have admitted that the relations between the two are at their lowest point ever after a damaging trade war waged by the previous Trump administration, and now the Biden administration having its own issues with China by reopening inquiries into the origins of COVID-19 in China. And yet that statement also refers to the phone call between China's Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden during Chinese New Year to promote a spirit of constructive relationships. And yet the US statement was at best perfunctory, perhaps even terse, simply saying that the US remains committed to continuing discussions. We know that following Wendy Sherman's recent visit to China, discussions were described as candid. For diplomats, that's often code for pretty much every difficult discussion being right out on the table, and often awkward discussions to follow. And yet Qin Gang, the new Chinese ambassador, has arrived here in the United States committed to trying to make a good start and promoting constructive dialogue with the US, tweeting out in the last week or so, congratulations to the United States Olympics team for its impressive medal haul at the Tokyo Olympics, and suggesting there are areas for mutual cooperation between these two sides, for example, in stemming the spread of the COVID-19 Delta variant, and also perhaps potential cooperation for both of these countries in trying to mitigate climate change, particularly when it comes to investing in renewable energy and green transport, specifically electric cars. But it's very difficult to know just how much common ground these two sides have based on these early meetings. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, staycation summer, why more Hungarians are choosing to holiday at home.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London, who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Tesla chief executive Elon Musk is confident that the company's delayed European gigafactory in Germany will be open before the end of the year.
Musk visited the $6.8 billion site alongside German Chancellor Angela Merkel's possible successor, Armin Laschet. Our correspondent Ryan Thompson is in Frankfurt for us. Ryan, how did the meeting go?
Hi there, Jamie. Well, all in all, a good meeting for Elon Musk. The Tesla CEO was looking to rub shoulders with the man who's likely to be Germany's next chancellor, and, well, he did just that. Arriving in what else than a signature Tesla, entrepreneur Elon Musk is looking to get Germany firmly on his side. He's met with the man who's likely to be this nation's next chancellor, Armin Laschet, as the American EV carmaker prepares to double down on business in Europe. Plans to open a so-called gigafactory outside Berlin have been tied up in red tape time and time again.
We have to accelerate our procedures and our bureaucracy and everything, but it's very slowly in Germany.
After touring the factory, which will employ 10,000 people, the CDU candidate promised his support, thanking Musk for Tesla's investment in Germany. Musk is hoping to fire up production lines as soon as October. The end result? Batteries, EV chargers, and Tesla's Model Y for European customers.
This plant's all about energy. Green energy that's sustainable, with electric cars and batteries to store solar and wind power. So, I think, hopefully this Giga Berlin, this factory here, can serve as an inspiration to people in Germany and throughout Europe for excitement about the future.
But not all are happy with the plans to bring Tesla to Germany. Not far away, protesters voice their frustration with the project.
I blame Tesla, and not only Tesla, but also the state government and the politicians, for building such a chemical factory in a drinking water protection area, and ultimately in one of the most arid regions of Germany.
The factory is still waiting for environmental agencies to give final approval, but Musk's visit has likely garnered crucial support.
So Ryan, Elon Musk hoping to see the first cars produced at that factory in October?
Yeah, that's right. We often will monitor Elon Musk's tweets to understand and get a bit of a sense of the temperature of his mood before or after an important visit like this. He's tweeted in just the past few hours that he is eyeing the date of October 9th to open that factory, and he's trying to throw a bit of a party to excite the community. So he's invited local residents of Berlin to come for a county fair and factory tours. He's really trying to take the microphone away from some of those environmental groups that you saw at the end of the report there and really change the narrative around his factory. It's a bit like Mr. Monopoly coming in and using all this money, using all this excitement to try and change the narrative, but Germans have seen the story in the news for a couple of months now, and they are divided. So the question here is, will this be enough to switch their opinion? And the answer is only time will tell.
Ryan Thompson in Frankfurt, thank you very much.
China has shut a key terminal at the world's third busiest container port after a worker tested positive for COVID-19. The majority of operations at the Ningbo Zhoushan port in the east of the country have been halted until further notice. The stoppage is raising fears of more turmoil for global supply chains.
Britain's Gatwick Airport is calling on the government to make international travel easier after reporting first-half losses of just under $340 million. As a result, the UK's second busiest airport has had to ask lenders for a temporary reprieve. Passenger numbers plunged to around 570,000 between January and June. That's a 97% drop on pre-pandemic levels.
The board of the UK asthma inhaler maker Vectura has recommended shareholders accept a controversial takeover bid from the tobacco company Philip Morris International. PMI raised its bid for Vectura to 165p a share last weekend, valuing the firm at $1.5 billion and outbidding a rival offer by US private equity group Carlyle.
Amazon Studios is moving its multi-million-dollar Lord of the Rings television series from New Zealand to the United Kingdom. The company says moving production aligns with its strategy of expanding its footprint and investing in studio space across the UK. It's a big loss for New Zealand, which cashed in on the film franchise. Amazon Studios says post-production of the first season will continue in New Zealand until June next year.
Samsung Vice Chairman J.Y. Lee has been released on parole. He served 7 months of a 2.5-year jail sentence after being found guilty of embezzlement and bribery. South Korea's Justice Ministry released Lee on national interest grounds relating to the pandemic's effect on the economy.
In the UK, from Monday, people who are fully vaccinated will no longer have to self-isolate if they've been identified as a close contact of someone who has tested positive for coronavirus. There had been calls to bring this forward, even with case numbers still high. There were fears that cases would peak after July the 19th, when almost all restrictions were lifted in England. But that peak came 4 days earlier than the so-called Freedom Day, when more than 60,000 new cases were reported. And you can probably see from this graph that since then the number of cases has been fluctuating. In the last few days, the numbers are back up to more than 30,000 new daily cases. Well, Sana Pizak is a public health expert at University College London. I asked her if it was time for the UK to open the champagne amid the retreat of COVID.
Well, the vaccine wall is holding, and that is very good news. What we are seeing, however, is that this flattening of cases is now slowly starting to reverse. We do see that there is a rise, although it's not to the extent that some modelers had predicted. But we have only just in the UK loosened up travel. So we're going to see the effect of that probably by September, at the same time as back to school.
Well, let's look down the line here a couple of months. What are you expecting? What are you forecasting? An increase in cases, an increase in hospitalizations, perhaps even an increase in deaths?
Yes, and it happens in that order, usually the 2-week lag in between. We only have to look to Israel to see that even with a high vaccine coverage, there has been still a significant increase in hospitalizations, which is why they had to reintroduce wearing face masks, even for those who are double vaccinated in indoor settings. So I predict that we will see a continuing rise in August, and September can become a crunch point where we see the impact of loosened travel restrictions internationally, alongside going back to school without those mitigation measures that we saw previously last year, where we had bubbles and other ways to protect unvaccinated kids.
We're over 18 months through this pandemic now. In terms of comparisons with other countries, how would you say the UK is doing in terms of its handling of this pandemic?
Well, some early errors that cost quite a lot. I think also the idea that we were pitting the economy against health. But once the vaccine rollout began, it was very quick, very successful. So there are definitely some significant strengths. I do, again, think that the weakness here is that leaving out children who could be also affected by long COVID and other measures. So I'd say that we will still be looking back in years to come to say to what effect that particular decision has had on not just young people, but all age groups in terms of these chronic, long-term complications. We saw reports in the Lancet that 1 in 3 people that were hospitalized went on to develop either a neurological or psychological complications and diagnoses. So that is quite significant. I think that, again, the big missing part of the policy here is ensuring that we have clean air in schools and offices. So I think that going forward, when we look at the UK and how it's responded, certainly excellent with tackling anti-vaxxers and vaccine hesitancy, lots of outreach around ensuring that BAME groups are being supported, that we also included religious leaders and places of worship as places where people can get their vaccines. So I think there have been lots of wins, but some really significant early failures that led to catastrophic loss of life. And I worry that now some decisions around the protecting of younger children could have devastating long-term effects with long COVID in mind.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Rome braces for wildfires as communities face evacuation.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top story. Afghanistan descends into chaos and a refugee crisis. Thousands of civilians make for the relative safety of Kabul as the Taliban take more territory.
Tesla's chief executive says Europe's long-delayed gigafactory in Germany will open before the end of the year. A new fire has broken out on the Greek island of Evia, just hours after officials said the blazes, which have ravaged the country for nearly 2 weeks, had been brought under control.
Firefighters in Italy are also struggling to contain a number of wildfires stoked by the hot winds of a sweltering heatwave. Tony Waterman reports.
When the Italian poet Dante Alighieri wrote his epic poem Inferno in the 14th century, he likely never imagined his earth-scorching circles of hell would hit so close to home. In this version, though, Lucifer isn't frozen mid-waste in a lake, but is a blistering heat wave scorching southern Italy.
We were going around sweating a lot. It was just a challenge to keep us hydrated while visiting all these beautiful places around here.
17 cities are on red alert heading into the weekend, including the capital Rome and Sicily, which earlier this week hit 48.8 degrees Celsius, a level some scientists believe is the highest temperature in European history. Spain is also bracing for soaring temperatures, local authorities passing out water on the streets. warning people to stay hydrated.
Today we have 46 degrees, so try to be hydrated.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are concerns the sweltering temperatures could fan already raging wildfires or spark new ones. In Greece, a new blaze has broken out on the island of Evia, mere hours after authorities said the situation was under control. More than 50,000 hectares have already burned, large swaths of the island now a charred wasteland. The Greek Prime Minister has called this year's wildfires the worst ecological disaster in decades.
The climate crisis is here, and it shows us that everything must now change, from the orientation of the economy to our national energy policy, from the functioning of the state to the daily habits of citizens that concern the environment.
But it could be too little, too late.
Earlier this week, a report by the world's leading climate scientists showed that no matter what humans do, high temperatures and extreme weather are now locked in for decades to come. A mass and immediate reduction of greenhouse gas emissions can still determine just how bad it will get, which circle in Dante's Inferno the world may ultimately reach. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Unprecedented rainfall has been wreaking havoc across the Chinese mainland. In Hubei province, 5 cities have issued the highest red alert for rainfall.
The downpours have caused power cuts and landslides, flooding hundreds of homes and damaging dozens of roads and bridges. Brian Dorman reports.
At least 21 people were killed overnight after heavy rain lashed a township in central China's Hubei province. 4 are still missing after the downpour, which lasted for 6 hours, from late Wednesday to early Thursday morning. Severely hit areas include Suizhou, Nanzhong, and Xiaogan. The town of Lulin in Suizhou City was at the center of the storm. Hubei's latest spell of torrential rains has triggered other natural disasters. China's Emergency Management Ministry says it sent a team to facilitate rescue efforts. Authorities say street disinfection began in areas as soon as the rain stopped. One health official says staff and equipment were immediately mobilized to clear the streets.
We had 60 people and 6 vehicles. This is what we are supposed to do. I'm sure it won't be finished tonight because there's a lot to cover. We will proceed step by step.
Fire and rescue authorities say some 170 personnel and 13 boats have been dispatched for assistance, and more than 5,000 people have been evacuated to safety. Hubei officials say reconstruction efforts are also underway in affected areas. Brian Dorman, CGTN.
The United Nations climate report released this week paints a grim picture of the future, suggesting that unless countries take drastic action against climate change, the world will become increasingly dangerous. China's Jipan Mao is part of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, responsible for the study. He explained to CGTN's Sun Ye what it could all mean for China.
The climate crisis is widespread, rapid, and fast intensifying. This week's bombshell UN climate report says unequivocally that humans are to blame.
It is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change. Human influence is making extreme weather and climate events, include heat waves, heavy precipitation, and the droughts in some regions, more frequent and more severe. Climate change is already affecting every region on Earth.
For China, which has seen among the heaviest bouts of rains this summer, extreme weather is likely to hit the country harder and more often.
So mainly with further warming in the future, we will face more frequent extreme weather and climate events such as heat wave, extreme precipitation, and even drought in some regions. In the long term, East Asia summer monsoon precipitation will increase. With increase of the heavy precipitation, especially increase with frequency and the intensity of heavy precipitation, it will lead to more frequent landslides in some mountain regions.
Other countries in East Asia could experience much the same. As the climate report draws from expertise from across the globe, Jai says the group's most important message is this: climate change is real. For the future, Jai says the way forward is clear: reduce greenhouse emissions. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
Europe.cgtn.com has all of the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick look. All that and more at Europe.cgtn.com.
This year alone, 1 in every $5 invested by venture capitalists has gone into the financial technology or fintech sector. CGTN's Stephen Cole has been investigating what the future really holds for fintech. He asked author Richard Turin about the issues that still need resolving as we head towards a digital financial future, and why the People's Bank of China appears to be leading the way.
The real issue is, who do you leave behind? If you go digital, do you leave behind the elderly? Do you leave behind poor people who may not be able to buy a smartphone or a device? So the real question is financial inclusion, and how do you make not just a digital currency, but how do you design, and this is what the PBOC has been very good at. The PBOC has designed special smart cards that are small and they have a thumbprint reader, and they're designed for people who don't have a smartphone to be able to use and access digital currency. So going forward and going digital and going into the future is a wonderful thing, but you have to make sure you don't leave people behind, and that takes a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of time, and the PBOC has really been doing a commendable job with that.
And you can see more of that interview on The Agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
A licensed firearms holder has shot dead 2 women, 2 men and a 3-year-old girl in the southwest of England. Police say Jake Davison's killing spree was carried out in about 6 minutes in the city of Plymouth. In online videos, Davison spoke of being beaten down and defeated by life. He shot himself after the killings. Police added that one of the victims was his mother.
Belgium is now accepting NHS COVID vaccination certificates from England and Wales, which allows fully vaccinated travellers to enter the country without 10 days mandatory quarantine. Visitors will still need to take a coronavirus test on day 1 or 2 after arriving and quarantine until results are received. Anyone without a vaccine certificate will still need to self-isolate.
The lawyer of a nurse in Germany accused of replacing COVID vaccines with a saline solution says it was a one-off incident. The nurse has admitted giving the saline to 6 people in April, but insists she did it to protect her job after dropping a vial containing the Pfizer vaccine. The authorities, however, fear the actual number affected is more than 8,000 people, and are asking patients to get re-jabbed.
British Olympic silver medalist Chijundu Uja has been provisionally suspended for an alleged violation of anti-doping rules. The sprinter, who raced in the 4x100-metre relay in Tokyo, has tested positive for 2 banned substances. If the case against him is proven, both he and his team could be stripped of their medals.
Over 70 people have been arrested in Turkey after a night of violence that saw attacks on the homes of Syrian refugees. Windows were broken and children injured at an apartment block in the capital, Ankara. It all began when reports emerged of the alleged killing of a local teenager by Syrians in a street fight.
Russia has told a BBC journalist in Moscow to leave the country by the end of the month. State TV says Sarah Rainsford has been declared persona non grata in retaliation for London not renewing or issuing visas to Russian journalists. The BBC said it was not commenting on the story.
After more than a year of restrictions, the pandemic has hit Hungary's tourism sector hard, with experts saying up to 35% of businesses have closed. Domestic tourism is beginning to recover, though, with more people choosing to holiday at home. Penelope Lierch reports.
It's Hungary's most popular tourism destination. Lake Balaton, known as the Hungarian Sea, famous for blue water, wine and a growing cultural scene. Hamela Winery has been running for 13 years. The last 12 months have been a struggle because of restrictions and fewer hospitality orders. But that's changing.
Tourism in Budapest was hit hard. I have businesses there as well. It's still very difficult to survive there. However, countryside tourism, inland tourism thrives, thank God.
Balaton's accommodation was fully booked months before the summer tourism window began, with Hungary lifting restrictions earlier than other countries based on the number of first-dose vaccines. Festivals like the annual Jazz Picnic attract close to 20,000 people over a weekend. The numbers are now back on track after last year's event was cancelled.
People for years, they reserve already the accommodation. So in the village for sure, but also in the area, you cannot find during our festival any accommodation.
The trend to holiday at home is being reflected across the country. Tourism experts say 80% of Hungarian holidaymakers have opted to stay in the country because of the pandemic, with younger age groups the most likely to head overseas.
I think there will definitely be more people. A lot of people won't travel abroad now.
A lot of people are afraid of traveling abroad because of administration and new virus variants.
While Hungarians are nervous to go overseas, so too are foreign tourists, with visitors to the country dropping dramatically. It's estimated at least 35% of tourism business was lost to the pandemic. And while domestic tourism is starting to improve, it won't make up for the COVID losses.
I'm not a fortune teller, but for the tourism sector in the whole country, we need at least 2 more years to get back. But here in Lake Balaton, we will get next year to the old numbers where we were before.
The industry is now working to attract guests from abroad to visit areas like this all year round. Penelope Leash, CGTN, Lake Balaton.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Replacing face-to-face with a virtual space. VR goes mainstream in South Korea.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
This week on Razor, could green electronics made from plant cells and vegetable fibres be the solution to mountains of e-waste? And we take a closer look at China's ambitious space program.
There's a lot of exciting talk of missions that go beyond the Moon and Mars, so it's really very exciting times for the Chinese space industry.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The Disney boss, Bob Chapek, has defended his company's multi-platform release, Black Widow, after the film star Scarlett Johansson began legal action for breach of contract. She argues that she lost millions of dollars in earnings when the movie was streamed.
He says the release on Disney Plus has enhanced her ability to earn additional compensation on top of the $20 million she's received to date. Meanwhile, Disney earnings for the third quarter have exceeded expectations. I spoke to Karen Krasanovic, a film industry commentator, about the results.
Well, Disney is doing one thing right, and that's buying everybody. It's a real cunning plan to buy everybody that it could possibly be vying for your audience. So they own Pixar. I mean, the list would go on and on. At ESPN, there's something for everybody. And Disney has always been a family channel, something for everybody. And now they've actually got that. They also have the nous in the business and the history in the business for being very, very ultra canny with their investments and also keeping their eye on the bottom line more so than other studios.
So one of the things they are doing well is increasing subscriber numbers. So do you think that is the new measure of success over making money at the box office?
You know, it would seem to be. It seems on the face of it that would be sensible, but actually, no. And Warner Brothers had this, that was sort of the canary in the mine when they did day and date for this whole slate of 2021. And they found that releasing day and date is where you can see a movie in the cinema or you can watch it at home on the streaming service. And they found that by releasing them both at the same time, the revenues were not comparable to when it was first shown in the cinema and then later you could see it on a streaming service. So with the smaller budget films, it works really well. But with the bigger budget movies, you need the cinematic or theatrical release in order to actually make those kind of films viable. Otherwise, they will not meet their production costs or their marketing budget.
Actor Scarlett Johansson is suing Disney over her film Black Widow, which was one of those dual releases, because her earnings were tied to money made at the box office. So do you think this could be a watershed moment for the way that actors are paid?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, an actor has to be very, very careful with the contracts because a lot of things are unprecedented. I mean, the pandemic is unprecedented. I mean, Jared Butler's also suing for loss of earnings in a previous film for him as well. I think that actors are going to be very, very keen on seeing where the numbers are coming from and what their revenue is tied to. Because they don't get just paid flat out. They also get paid on performance. That was with Scarlett Johansson. And she is suing for the amount of money that she was projected to have earned if Black Widow had been released first in the cinemas and then going to streaming rather than simultaneously. And also the delay, we don't know whether the pandemic delay is adding to the allure of a movie or damaging its box office. We still don't have enough data to tell if that's the case.
But Disney itself has come back quite strongly against Scarlett Johansson.
Well, Disney really has acted quite angrily to Scarlett Johansson, I mean, publishing the amount of money that she was making and also saying that she was not taking into consideration pandemic woes of people that needed entertainment. I mean, all sorts of very peculiar non-business-like arguments. And I think that's because Scarlett's made 9 films with Disney or with Marvel and Disney combined. And I think she's also, one of the, if not the highest paid female actors in the business. She can open a movie, very few can. And I think that Disney is not only seeing her as kind of not really playing the game with them, but also kind of showing up their cunning ways, if I might say it that way. But an actor has to do that now. All performers have to do that. Hollywood is noted for decades of having arcane accounting methods. So I think in a way they're punishing Scarlett Johansson for being very smart and as smart as they are.
So what about the big screen then? Do you think this is the beginning of the end, or are people going back to movie theatres?
This is not the end of movies. People love the theater. They love streaming too, but you know, after 18 months of sitting at home watching things, no matter how big your screen is, no matter how big your family is, you want to have an event. You want to go out, you want to eat popcorn, sit with people you know, and feel the film suck you in along with everybody else and feel the reactions of the group. It's something very primal in a funny old way, and it allows us to have a bigger escape from reality than we have at home. So no, the movies are not dying. They're just changing a little as per usual.
Virtual reality is becoming a hot commodity in South Korea as new platforms are being created to meet the growing demands of socially distant encounters during the pandemic. The virtual space is being used for social interactions, e-commerce and political campaigns.
But some experts say this may all come at a cost. Joseph Kim reports.
This isn't a video game or an animation. It's what college orientations are starting to look like in South Korea. With the coronavirus pandemic, many social settings like this one are going online. It's called the metaverse, combining the words meta and universe to describe a shared simulated space that blends the virtual and physical worlds using extended augmented reality. And this virtual reality is being called the future of the internet.
In our digital world, all eyes are on metaverse. It marks a paradigm shift as we transition from face-to-face communication to non-face-to-face communication, with the potential of metaverse-related contents playing an important role.
Metaverse technology is being utilized in various ways. South Korea's defense ministry and fire departments are using it for training simulations, companies for more engaged online meetings, and social media platforms are using it as a new place to socially connect, to give users a space to freely express themselves. In the virtual world, users can become whoever they want. They can customize their avatars to be someone completely different. For example, to have peach-colored hair and blue sapphire eyes, and display different emotional expressions to make them more lifelike, almost as if they're interacting with a real human being. It's also becoming a hotspot for e-commerce. Individuals and private firms are jumping into the metaverse to create virtual shops like convenience stores. Furthermore, political parties are using it as a way to campaign online amid social distancing. With its infinite possibilities, the government has announced plans to help foster development. However, much of the imaginary world is already being confined to merely reflect our current systems, with experts arguing about the potential risks.
An important question and difficult problem are, how are we going to separate and classify the multiple personas, the persona of the real world and of the imaginary world? How will the laws and norms of our current real world cross over into the imaginary one, if any? Some are of the opinion they should stay the same and create something like a digital courthouse and law enforcement inside these imaginary spaces.
There are additional concerns about social behavior changes and personal data collection. But South Korea seems willing to embrace these risks to explore and capitalize on this whole new world. Joseph Kim for CGTN, Seoul.
The headlines again. Afghanistan descends into chaos and a refugee crisis. Thousands of civilians make for the relative safety of Kabul as the Taliban take more territory.
Tesla's chief executive says Europe's long-delayed gigafactory in Germany will be open before the end of the year.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.